Joining me from Sheffield is David Bradford, a gambling addict who stole money from his employer to feed his habit. He was one of those who put himself on the banned list. The betting firm 888 continued to pursue him. David, it's very nice of you to join us this evening. Just talk us through your own experience. How much were you gambling at your lowest point?
I was gambling every day or every evening. I worked away a lot, so in that sort of after work period, not only did I cover the boredom and suck myself into gambling online, I sought to get that one big win that probably all gamblers try to get, to correct all my financial worries.
And did you ever win big?
Never. And obviously to win big is relative to how much you think is not very much. Yeah. But from my point of view, I never won big. I never lost big either, but I lost. And obviously that's what the industry is all about, making us all losers and their shareholders richer.
What do you think you spent on gambling through the course of your life?
I couldn't give you a figure, to be honest, and I don't think it really matters about what the figure is. It's what it actually does to you, your self-esteem, your family and your friends, who all have a different view on you once they find out that you've been, well, not only deluding yourself, but hiding a secret sort of problem from all these people that you have your closest. You
went to prison for fraud, and when you were there, you still kept receiving texts inviting you to gamble online.
Yeah, I best correct the way you put that, because obviously I didn't have a mobile phone or anything in prison. But my own mobile phone that was at home, my son had to attempt to try and stop these texts coming through, which was a significant task for him to have to do.
And did the company respond to his request to stop?
From what I understand, not immediately. It took many attempts before they actually did stop. For me, this sort of is a good example of how the industry sees its duty of care, which is something that they only pay lip service to. This measly fine today will do next to nothing in awakening some kind of customer care that goes a bit deeper than it does now. Indeed, many people like me will be and will always continue to have the problem, even if it's dormant. You know, I strongly believe in what many doctors have said, is that this is a mental problem, which is obviously a mental health problem, and should be treated that way, not as just some people being reckless with money.
So what was the impact that it really had on your life? Can you put it into words?
In a sense, in no particular order, but for me, I've never been able, from the time in prison, which was over 3 years ago now, I've not been able to get a job anything like similar to the one I had, and I'm now working up to 70 hours a week just to stand still, doing a mundane job. I have no self-esteem, I have no self-belief. Every time now I make a decision, I have to double check I'm making the decision in the right way. And then to load that further, the emotional burden on my family, who feel cheated by me, and well, quite rightly, that's what did happen. So that I seem not to care one little bit about them, and I were making decisions which, in a sense, will and have ruined our lives.
And if you could ask for one thing to change in the way the industry operates now, what would that be?
I think one is falling short of the many things I'd like to ask them for, but right. I believe a strategy of care that steps in and assists, in a sense, throws a parachute to a troubled gambler. There should be more than one NHS surgery dealing with this issue. Unfortunately, there is only one. I think that's in London. There should be access to a raft of precautionary interventions by the gambling industry or the gambling companies when they see a gambler operating erratically. And I also do believe that there's software available where the industry and the banks could talk together so they could see whether somebody's actually going beyond their means. But there doesn't seem to be any effort being put into looking for these fairly simple solutions in my mind.
We're going to try and find some right now. David Bradford, thank you very much. We really appreciate you sharing that with us. To Tom Watson then, of course, Shadow Culture Secretary, well, which is why it falls in your brief, Tom. When you hear David's story and you hear what he's asking for, successive governments have failed him and many others who talk about that very coherently as a mental illness they've been taken advantage of.
Yes, can I first say, Emily, I thought David was very brave to tell his story on TV live like that. But of course, David is one of many hundreds of thousands of people who currently have gambling addiction. And gambling addiction has grown by up to a third in recent years. And that's why I think we need to...
It's grown since 2005,
yes.
And it was the Labour policy of deregulation that created that massive boom. Do you have remorse for that?
Yes, I think certainly we have to acknowledge that there are negative consequences of that act, particularly where we attempted to regulate fixed odds betting terminals, which were not...
You're talking acknowledge negative consequences. Can you not just say this was a terrible mistake, as Tessa Jowell has done?
Yes, I can, and I actually sat on that bill, but let me just say that bill did many good things to regulate the gambling industry, but where it went wrong was on fixed odds betting terminals. But also, let's also recognise that regulation that it created is no longer fit for purpose. Essentially what happened there, well, let me just explain. That piece of legislation was for gambling in the analogue age. And a decade later, we've had an explosion of new services
That was
online.
Short-sighted then, because there were warnings at the time and it came from the Conservatives who were in opposition. Why did Gordon Brown, why did Tony Blair press ahead and ignore those warnings?
Actually, the focus of that piece of legislation and the public discourse, and you probably on Newsnight as well, was on how you regulate large casinos, which is actually, paradoxically, the most regulated part of the gambling industry.
Well, they were talking, of course, about super casinos, weren't they?
What we failed to understand was the impact of these fixed odds betting terminals, which until that point were completely unregulated.
It wasn't just that, though. It was adverts on television, it was sponsorship. You can't take your kid to a game without seeing gambling advertised to the very young. I mean, what's all that about?
Emily, I'm not running away from this. I think we all have to acknowledge, cross-party, that the current arrangements we have for regulating this new world of gambling are not fit for purpose. And it is Britain's hidden crisis. There are an estimated 400,000 problem gamblers in Britain, and that is 400,000 families destroyed, communities under pressure. And I think we need to act urgently to address these concerns, because I don't want to be sitting on Newsnight in years to come to hear the testimonies of other.
But Tom, we've just had an election, and there was one line, I think, in the Labour manifesto, and you know that gambling disproportionately affects the poor. You know this is rampant capitalism, predatory capitalism writ large.
Yes.
Whatever happened to the Corbyn idea of the many, not the few, the left behinds? This was predicted to be a problem, and yet it was ignored 2 months ago.
No, it wasn't ignored. We've been raising our concerns about aspects of problem gambling for many years. I've been raising it in the chamber for about 5 years. I first mentioned fixed odds.
So let's just talk about what would you do then? Would you roll back everything that happened in 2005?
I think firstly you have to look at where these stakes are held. Currently the government can only review the stakes of machines in retail outlets. I think there's a case for looking at online stakes in the online space.
Adverts, would they go?
I think you've got to look at them, and if you look at the gambling industry.
But why are you saying look at them? You've had 10 years to talk about this. You've been very concerned about it, as you say. So isn't it clear in your mind what has to change now if you're in power?
Yes, there needs to be massive reform. We've got a gambling industry that spends many millions of pounds lobbying ministers, journalists and civil servants on the message that they believe in responsible gambling. And what we've seen today is irresponsible gambling. And the industry has to take responsibility. But the devil is in the detail. I'm not going to make policy up on the hoof as an opposition shadow on your show, but I'm telling you we're not going to run away from this, and we are going to be demanding that the government take this hidden crisis seriously. We'll work with them. We've got a very good minister in Tracy Crouch who has spoken out about regulating fixed odds betting terminals but has been muzzled by the Treasury. They've got a review going on at the moment. If we get to October, we will support the government if they want to make some radical changes.
So you're
to the
putting it
industry.
on their plate first.